We're live.
All right, we're live. How y'all doing tonight? I am Christina Joy. Welcome to Sankofa Video Books and Cafe. We've been here since 1997. Thank God. Wow. Yes, give us a round of applause. That's a great feat. Oh, okay. Tonight we have the lovely Jamila Millix, the author of Moonrise over New Jessup. If y'all haven't read this book, I need you to actually read this book. I'm not joking. I need you to go buy it. If you haven't read it, read it. And then digest. So this is why we're having this conversation. I'm very excited. It's so great to see you. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm blessed and highly favored.
I know that's right.
How's everybody doing out there?
How are y'all doing today? I mean, we just established that everyone just got off work, so they're like, all right, I don't know, call and response, maybe, I don't know. It's fine. But
yeah, we're not gonna do that thing where we're like, no, really, how you doing? Don't do that.
No, I get it. For real. So tonight, I'm so excited. So one, this is like a continuation of a conversation because we had, if y'all didn't go to the international Howard's International Writers Fest last year or over the last 2 years, because now we're about to hit year 3 this fall. I curated a panel with Jamila and 3 other lovely sisters, Ebony, and right now names are failing me. So the two sisters that are actually sisters who wrote another book together, and all 4 of these lovely Black women were on my panel because I got it like that. And I read their books and. Moonrise over New Jessup, like I don't even know where to begin, y'all. This is like this is such a good book, and I have to say this because I don't really read. I haven't been reading adult fiction. Mm-hmm. If I'm reading adult fiction, I'm trying to go for like James Baldwin, Toni Morrison. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to get up on my classics, but then I did this, and I was like, I'm reading this book, and it's just like, dang, it gives you all those feels, all of the Toni Morrisons, all of the James Baldwin. I stand on this proclamation because if you want to learn about, I made a proclamation because if you want to learn about Black families, if you want to learn about desegregation and segregation and Brown versus Board of Education, that whole issue. If you want to learn about free Black towns,
yes,
free Black towns, like free, really free, not like free. Like we got our own hospital, we got our own hotel, church,
lots of churches,
everything.
We're in Alabama,
right? It's the Alabama. So tell us. Why did you embark on this story? What called this story to you?
I always tell people I have to first thank my ancestors, my elders, because I came up hearing these stories about how when they were coming up in Alabama, I always say my people were Alabama before Alabama was Alabama. So for them, talking about the places where they hunted for their food, where they fished, where they went to church, where they went to school, where their teachers, they could look at their teacher and say, I could be a teacher. Their neighbors were doctors, and the next door neighbor was a carpenter. My granddad was a carpenter, right? And so for me, growing up hearing all that about Demopolis, Alabama, and hearing about outside of town, and then going to school and getting these really reductive narratives about Blackness in the South, they didn't match up. It wasn't that my family spared me of the trauma, the anti-Blackness that they went through, that they suffered. But it was so varied and so nuanced in the stories that they told. When I would compare them against what I was learning in the books were so Black. And so I really wanted to tell a story that was just full of my family's anecdotes, that was full of my family, everything. And so this book just sort of came out.
It did. It came out. It came out. And it's, first of all, I want to say that for some reason, ex-lawyers make some great authors. Like, I don't know why, it's like a thing.
We got 3 lawyers here right now.
I'm like, if y'all ever want to change over, clearly you see the path is laid in gold before you. Like,
Gold.
gold.
Right, Josh?
Okay, gold.
Golden. The path to authorship.
Look, no, that's a whole other
Oh,
conversation.
right.
That's a whole other conversation. I'm just saying, if you want to write a good book, can people read it? Don't read it.
I mean,
Lawyers can write, clearly.
well, but this is different than legal writing, because legal writing is very technical, it's very dry. We just talked today about like storytelling and really thinking about advocacy for people. And I think sometimes in lawyering, you get into this idea that I'm advocating for not necessarily things, but like characters in a book, like we were talking about today. It's a lot easier to dismiss or sort of marginalize a character. It's a lot easier to move a character like a chess piece in a book. But if you're thinking about advocacy for people, flesh and blood people, if you're thinking about writing in the book, flesh and blood people, all of a sudden, those decisions that you make are a lot different. And I think that gives you a level of empathy in your writing, whether it's legal writing or fiction, that you just don't see otherwise. But that said, I mean, you only have so much. You have a fact section in a brief, and you're gonna get the creativity sucked right out of you. So but I think that sort of is the parallel between the work that I was doing and the work I do now.
Do you feel like lawyering in any way prepared you to write this book?
In some ways, I think yes, but I think that the bigger influence on my writing this book is 1, my family, and 2, I'm going to say it, the Howard University School of Law. So for anybody who's in here thinking about law school, I will say that when you go to Howard, from the first day that you get any application materials, they tell you the Charles Hamilton Houston quote, a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. And that's really because as an advocate, you use your skills for 1 of 2 things, to do justice or to do injustice, right? And so for me, that training that I got at Howard, wait a minute, HU?
You know.
All right, thank you.
That's right.
The training I got at Howard, I walked into J. Clay Smith's Common Law 2 class. He said, we're going to talk about the civil rights movement or the equal rights movement. In my class, we're going to talk about the freedom rights movement because we weren't fighting for the right to have the equal mindset to people who considered our second-class citizenship our birthright. We were fighting for the freedom to be the best version of ourselves we could be. So in our class, in this class, we're going to talk about the freedom rights movement and what it means to be free. And so that opened up a whole conversation, because I came up and I was reading all this stuff about Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, right, the Deep South, and how it's no place that we have any business being. But at the end of the day, I was like, my people are free in Alabama. We're free all over this country. Now, some people may not acknowledge that, but what you think about my freedom doesn't influence my freedom. And going to Howard, I think, really taught me the language and skills to fight and to write in ways that would be advocacy for my people.
As a double alum, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
But I say that I think it was driven home more in the grad program because you're, and I did the school of social work. And so social workers are natural advocates. Like you are supposed to be an advocate for the people, but the difference in learning social work at Howard versus learning social work anywhere else is that you get the Black perspective, and that it's not just our perspective. Like it is a theoretical orientation that we follow, and if you don't write your papers, if you don't write these papers on it, then you're going to fail. Okay, because I think people really belittle the Black perspective in a way that's it's not scholarship, it's just opinion, it's just y'all yelling at The world.
Well, the what people, you know what I'm saying? And that's the thing. I think when you talk about, when we use the word people, I think we really need to stop the default being white people. If you're talking about white people, say white people.
I ain't talking about white people.
Or if you're talking about, like I'm saying is, or if we're talking about a white perspective, if we're talking about the centering of white perspective, that's a whole, like, that's the nuance, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about, for real. So, I mean, and I say this because, like, I had this woman who asked me this interview question. It was these terrible interview questions. And one of the questions she asked me was, she told me that I was writing that New Jessup was about the margins of society. And so she starts with that. And then, so there's this, like, you know, you ask a question, but it's laced with premises that you have to agree to in order to even get to the question. And so she said, it's you know, this beautiful, you're drawn, she's telling me I'm drawn to the mucky and the tenuous, the swamp and all this stuff, and the margins of society. And then she said, what is it about the margins of society that draws you to write about it? And I said, it baffles me when I get this question, that a place, a community with a hospital, a savings and loan, schools, churches, a hotel, business districts, an auto shop, and on and on and on, how anybody could consider that the margins of anything, except instead of a society in and of itself. So it forces me to ask you the question, how do you define the margins and how do you define society? Because, and then of course the magazine wouldn't run it. It was a pretty combative interview. But you know what, that's my thing, so that's why I'm saying the language matters, the language that we use to talk about the perspectives matters, because even as Black people, I think it's really important for us to understand the influence that whiteness has over our thinking so we can exercise it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes. Because nobody understands it. Like, I mean, we watch it through selling books.
Mm-hmm.
And we do intentionally sell books by, for, and about people of African descent.
Mm-hmm.
But like, even in that,
yeah,
you see the scholarship, a lot of the great big scholarship is done by white people.
I know.
On us.
Right.
And it's like,
right.
What are your motives? Like, why are you telling this story versus helping somebody else whose story this actually is,
right,
to actually tell it?
Right.
If you want to do it that way, if you want to tell this story, then find the actual person who's a part of this story.
Well, and you know what that reminds me of is Venus and Two Acts, right?
Mm-hmm.
When Saidiya Hartman wrote this essay about these enslaved women and men who were part of the Middle Passage, and she talks about how their experience is documented by the enslavers. Now the enslavers, the people who are running the ship, write some of the most horrific things, admissions of things that they did to the enslaved people. But what they cannot capture was the response.
Mm.
You don't know how something feels in my body. You don't know how what you're saying affects my community. You know, I heard, but then when we talk about places like Dairy Farms was one of the first all-Black enclaves to be founded in Washington, D.C. Now when you talk to people about Dairy Farms, all they want to talk about is the crime and the drugs. But I'm like, y'all have to understand that even that narrative serves somebody, and it's not us. So when we talk about our places, and we talk about our literature, and we talk about our communities and our people, I really want us to get to a space where we can recognize how whiteness has impacted and affected the ways that we view our own community, so we can understand it and exercise it, get rid of it, do prayers over it, rebuke it, whatever you gotta do, get a cross and garlic, whatever, get rid of it. All of the above. You know, some holy oils. I don't know, whatever you gotta do, paint your door blue, get some bottles for the yard, I don't know what it is, just get rid of it.
Because it affects everything.
It does.
It absolutely affects everything. And I think that the beauty of your book is that, you know, I watched several interviews, like,
Oh.
girl, I can't. And I would get to the main thing I saw, and I was just like, oh my god. But in your book, this is not a traumatic read. This is not this is a love story. This is historical fiction. This is like, I really learned about perspectives of what was going on during this time. This is not, oh, white people done blown up this town. And now here we are in the aftermath, and we're just, no, this is not that at all.
No, and I really made choices. People say this work does the work of decentering whiteness. And I'm like, no, this work centers Black people.
Exactly.
And even the idea that something decenters, it's like it's in the middle and we're actively pushing it out. I'm like, no. This book centers Black people. And if that bothers you, then you have some work to do, because that doesn't bother me. That's like when we were talking today and you asked if the book was sensitive. I said, it's not sensitive to me. This is like family stories. I feel like talking to my people. But if it's sensitive to people, or somebody, the same woman said, this is a difficult read. I said, difficult for who? But
her interviews.
and that's fine. I'm like, if that forces you to go and look in the mirror, and it's difficult for you looking in the mirror, don't project that on the fact that this book doesn't center you. But when thinking about, because the book does sort of have off-screen, a couple of allusions to off-screen trauma, and I did that for two reasons. First, because coming up, I didn't get the full brunt of what happened to my family. My auntie who married into my family, her family's store was burned down. We didn't know anything about the origin. We knew that the kerosene tank blew up. We knew that much. We didn't know until like a year ago that they knew exactly who did it. They knew that the police wouldn't do anything about it because they were probably partially involved.
Right.
Because it was a thriving store in Demopolis, Alabama. Right? So we would get these sort of off-screen narratives. And so in writing this, I was writing it the way I would hear it. And so it's sort of these things happen in passing. And it's not to dismiss the fact that these things happen, but my thing is, I don't think we should have anybody's trauma in our mouth, anybody's worst day in our mouth when we're talking about people. Because if you can't talk about the ways that I live, don't dare come and talk about the ways that I died.
That was a mic drop, y'all.
I don't want to try this.
What? Because what you're saying also reminds me of that Toni Morrison interview that probably that went viral a few years ago of the white woman or white person.
When are you gonna start talking about white people?
Yes. When are you gonna start talking about white people? As if that was her job.
Right. And like she said, as if our lives are not our own and they're not interesting unless they are somehow juxtaposed against whiteness. As though we have no interiority, no relationships, no love, no complexity in our own community. It's only our job to be a foil or be something in relation to somebody else. That's not my ministry. No. And that's not what this book is going to do.
It's not. And I realized that we just kind of jumped in and didn't give them a little synopsis. Sorry. Who was like, girl,
you did that. You said it was just going to be a conversation.
It is a conversation. But, it is a conversation. But, if you could give them a little synopsis of the book and
Sure. Let's go all the way back. So, Moonrise over New Jessup is set between 1957 and 1961 Alabama. And it follows the story of Alice Young, who is a woman who grew up in sort of a more rural area. And she has to leave in a hurry from her home house and to Birmingham, but doesn't have any money to get to her sister in Chicago. And the bus stops in New Jessup, and she looks around and she sees like this sister walking into a cafe, the front door of the cafe. She's got bronze stockings on her legs. She's got these really nice shoes. And most importantly, in Alabama in 1957, she walks in the front door. So Alice is like, where am I? And so she sort of looks up and down the avenue and she sees just Black people everywhere. And so she decides to stay a while. She gets 2 dogs, one with a tailor-made dress shop, and one at Mr. Marvin's Diner. And it's at Mr. Marvin's Diner that she meets her beau, Raymond Campbell, who is a grandson of the town. And Raymond has recently moved back home after his mom passed away. And he and his friends decided that they want to court a national civil rights organization to New Jessup, not for the purpose of integration, because New Jessup is a thriving Black community, independent of white people who are on the other side of the woods, on the other side of some really nasty swamp land. And so these young people decided they want to court this national civil rights organization and say, hey, we have a good thing here, but the issues that we have are with our vote being disenfranchised and with our money being diverted. And so they convinced this national organization to allow them to try a municipality to maintain their independence from the other side of the woods, that they can vote their own city council and mayor in, and they can have, run of their own place as a municipality. And, but because it's a national civil rights organization, so the old heads and the white folks across the woods would take issue with it because there's sort of this stable détente, is like how I think the best way I've heard it described. So they're doing, Alice is in the middle of this and she's sort of responsible for both coming to New Jessup, and because she's surrounded by Blackness, she can rise and shine, but she's also pulling Raymond's tide. She's responsible for all these people in the book and how they ultimately navigate the New Jessup coming into sort of this next chapter of its life.
Y'all. Reading this, I was like, wow. So like, my mom recently told me, like, when my grandparents moved from North Carolina to New Jersey, because that's where I'm from. I'm a Jersey girl. Mm-hmm. Been down here since 2011, and she said it was around. I think she said it was 1958 or 1959, and I was like, wow, that's when like this book was taking place. So it's just like, wow, context. And then the first thing I read at Howard was The Warmth of Other Suns.
Yes. Yes.
By Isabel Wilkerson. And there's such a fantastic book on the Great Migration. So like, it felt like I'm reading the same history, but I'm just getting this beautiful love story that is clearly going to be a movie. Because God, like, oh my goodness, like, give me a show or something. I'm like, y'all. Like the love story alone, like just the way you just they creep into this love is so sweet, and it's just so like we don't get to have these types of old timey love stories that just make you like, oh.
But the funny thing is, you call it old timey. First of all, you better remember your grandparents were not born old. And your grandparents became your grandparents somehow. Right? So you gotta remember that. Right? They weren't born like credit days and excuse me. They weren't born to be your grandmama and your granddaddy. Right? They had bigger aspirations than to be put in your face. Right? So one of the interesting things that I've been hearing is this very same thing, that students, that younger people read the book and then they go and talk to their grandparents. And their grandparents are like, I've been telling you about this. Like, this isn't news. So then the grandparents read the book and it causes them to have a much fuller conversation that's centered, but then the grandparents get young again. And so when my elders read the book, they're like, this is us as young people. And I think not only do they appreciate having their side of town sort of recognized in literature, because when I was giving my elders the book at first, I said, I wrote this book, and I promised them I wouldn't publish it unless they approved of it. So, you're talking about folks in Alabama, that was a risk. But I would much rather have a book that my family can stand behind, because now they're happy as clams to see the book doing well, because they're like, this is us, right? But it's also important, I think, for us to recognize that, you know, this is just a book that we can enjoy amongst ourselves. I mean, it's a story that takes place during a particular time in our history, but the elders are so sick, I think, at least my elders were so sick of getting that same question, what were you doing during the civil rights movement? Because they're like, we were living. My Carolyn just told me the other day that she and my uncle were both stepping on each other in college, and she was saying something about, you know, y'all girls think that you're the first ones and you know how to switch y'all's tails. I'm like, I don't need all that. I don't need all that. I get it. You were young. Okay, I get it. I understand. Thank you. All right, that's enough. But, you know, this book, I feel like, is an homage to love stories, because we fall in love now. You talk about old-timey courting. I have women come up to me talk about, where's my Raymond? And I'm like, sis, I don't know. And I have brothers when I did, what was the podcast? Books of Pop Culture. Reggie read Raymond's little game, and he said, my girlfriend's in the other room though, and I hope she didn't hear me, because I'll have to pocket that later. And I was like, look at this.
I love it.
Black love.
I love it. I love it. Because Raymond had game.
Raymond had game. Alice has a little game.
Alice had game too.
She has a little game.
Alice had game. Like, okay.
You know, she called him Mr. Mayor. All right, Mr. Mayor. And you all know the look, right? All right, Mr. Mayor.
It's like the fact that you captured the looks in the book. Like, it's like, you literally sit there like, it's like you're peeking in the room watching them as they be all cute. And you're just like, this is adorable. Like, I'm literally taking notes. And I love the relationship between her and her sister, even though it's not technically a part of the book, technically.
Well, it is, because it's
I mean,
great
yeah,
migration. A great migration.
Yeah, you're right, exactly. Well, I guess what I mean is, like, we don't get to have her with Alice,
She's not,
you know, in the book, but that whole narrative in and of itself, what happens when somebody leaves and you can't find them, like, what happens when nobody talks about that?
right, because, you know, nowadays I think it's hard for people, younger people, to think about a time when not only were there no cell phones, but Alice in rural Alabama, they probably didn't have a phone in their house, right? And so the only connection that they had was letters. And y'all remember last week when AT&T was acting brand new, I was at FAMU and I made a comment. I said, some of y'all in here are like beside yourselves because your crush can't text you. Now imagine this goes on, AT&T outage goes on forever. Your crush moves away and you have no access to information to find them. You know, it's not like today where you're like 2 clicks away, like you have some little meet cute on the subway, and then all of a sudden you put out a blast on Twitter or 4X or whatever it is, and then the next thing you know, the world has found this person. Now they're probably married with 2 kids, but you know, that's a whole other thing. But it's not like that. Like the world is not connected like that. And so the connections that they had were so tenuous. And it, you know, her loss of her, I mean, I know where her sister is. I know what happened. But, you know, so many of our families in the quote Great Migration, which at first was supposed to mean magnitude, but I think a lot of times Northerners think it means upgrade,
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I think so that narrative, we don't talk about that enough. That our families that, you know, it's great, so we've moved north and it's better. And my cousin would be like, it's different. But the idea that her sister could move somewhere, be in the same country, and be completely lost to her forever. You know, we can't even imagine that. And so I thought it was really important to sort of question this language that we use around the Great Migration. Because it wasn't so great for people. And to think that people left land behind. They left family behind. They left loved ones of all stripes. They left their churches. They left their schoolmates. They left all sorts of stuff behind in search of a better life. And then, it sort of begs the question, what did when they arrived in their rival cities, as Charles Will calls them, what were they arriving to? And what was their experience? So, I think that with Rosie, but none of the people in the book, I wanted to be just like a study, right? Rosie was a person.
Yeah.
So she took, well, I'm not gonna tell you how she got where she did, but Rosie left. And, excuse me.
Don't spill things.
I'm not, I won't tell you. And it's not the next book.
Right.
That's the lawyer, and she's trying to flip me. Anyway, but yeah, so I really thought that people lived this, and so how would these two sisters live and experience this quote great migration and all the things that happened at the time? Because they were close.
Like really close.
Yeah.
Like.
But that happened with my daddy. I've heard people say, "Oh, that would never happen." That happened with my daddy. So my daddy graduated from college from North Carolina A&T. When he was in ROTC, did his 2, 3, whatever years in the military. Then for 8 years after that, he was ghost. For 8 Christmases, 8 birthdays, 8 Easters, everything. My daddy was gone. They thought he was dead. So then my daddy shows up in Stony Creek, Virginia. He got my mama on his arm, a Mercury Cougar, and a job at IBM. And they're like, "Negro, where have you been for 8 years? You just vanished into thin air. You show up here, you're engaged, you got a job in a muscle car. You gotta catch us up." And to this day, my daddy's been gone only 14 years this year. Nobody knows where he was. So it happened.
That happens.
Yeah.
A lot, and particularly in Black families.
Right.
And that's since slavery.
Well,
Before it was,
Yeah.
Within slavery, it's the fact that we're kept apart. If you had a partner, then you might not live on the same plantation. You might live on the next plantation. You might not live in the same quarters. You might live elsewhere. You might get sold. Your family might get sold. It's constantly the work, the labor of this country is keeping Black people apart and keeping Black people from having sustainable families, keeping Black people from actually nurturing one another the way that we want to nurture one another.
But even in that, so my Auntie Jay always tells me, "You better keep telling these people Alabama is more than the Civil War and the Civil Rights." And she was separated from her son because her son was incarcerated. And so the penal system in this country is such that you can just get moved, and then it takes them a while to get your paperwork together or whatever. And so you've sort of disappeared into the system. And so she kept calling, had to talk to this lawyer. And that's in the year of our Lord 2023, right? That's last year that this happened. And so, the reason I bring that up is because I think it's really important to recognize that we as Black people know that game, right? You think my auntie gave up on finding her son? When he turned up in Pennsylvania, you think she didn't go visit him just to figure out, just to get a look at him? And so my thing is, no, it's not perfect, but I think we need to also have the conversation, the flip side of that narrative, to show all the different ways that he has resisted that separation and how we have fought to maintain those connections. Because that's, to me, our story is, I know people hate this word these days, but resilience is very much a part of our story. And I don't want us to lose that in thinking that it's just some buzzword that we're tired of hearing. Because she did not give up on him. And she was scared to death, obviously. Her son just goes from he's transferred out of the blue. And then he's, in the system for a while. And he's lost in the system for a while. She was the one I think really found him. So, but my thing is, I want us to also have those conversations about how we continue to try to maintain our connections. And despite the fact that outside our community, people keep telling us, Black people don't know how to love each other. Black people don't know how to have family dynamics and connections. And that's why I keep saying we need to take control of the narrative of our own stories, because that's not what has played out in this situation and so many situations like that.
Absolutely. I mean, the resilience is like the underlying thing. It's the thing that keeps us going. I think it is the thing that, you're right, like to some degree, resilience is kind of thrown in our face as like this, oh gosh, you're resilient, so you can do it. Like,
Right, but why can we not have ownership over that word?
I think it's because we don't have ownership over the words. Because the words are not being all told by us.
But wait a minute, we don't have ownership over the words.
No, as in
we
the
invented
words.
hip-hop.
I mean the words, as in the land of the letters. As in
Land of the
who
letters.
published this book? As in, you know.
Did you just say the land of the letters?
Yes, I just quoted Baba Haki. Thank you, Baba Haki. Because because like Baba Haki said, he knows that he could be way more famous in the land of the letters. That he should be way more recognized in the land of the letters. He chose not to be.
Yeah.
He chose, like Toni Morrison asked him if he wanted to be published just when she asked Angela Davis and all that.
Yeah.
He was like, no, I'm gonna publish my own books, and I'm gonna continue to publish my own books and other Black people's books. And most Black people don't know what third world press is. So that is the resilience, and that is the sacrifice that he made, because he chose to keep it within us.
Yeah.
And you know, it's hard. We are a testament to that. Like,
no, I know it. But you know, this space to me is a testament also to the fact that there's a way that we care for each other and we love on each other that is unparalleled. I was talking to my friend Dawn Turner. She wrote Three Girls from Bronzeville, and we were talking about there. She tells a story of Three Girls from Bronzeville about how her mama taught herself to drive by tailing cab drivers in Chicago. And this is a really great book. I mean, but her mama literally, her daddy, Dawn's father, was a cab driver, and there was some abuse in the relationship. But the one thing her mama said was, if anybody's gonna be able to show me how to navigate the streets of Chicago, it's gonna be a cab driver. So she went and got herself a car, and then she would just tail these cab drivers until the cab driver would get out and be like, lady, why are you following me? Right? But it's just this, what I think of as this really indomitable spirit. It really, to me, is the most tragic thing that I can think of in our community is somebody who has had their spirit broken. Because to me, the Black spirit is indomitable. But that doesn't mean that it's completely resolute. It doesn't mean that it can't be shattered or broken or infiltrated in some way. So, but to think about stories like that, to think about, like, I have moonshiners in my family. You know what I'm saying? Like this woman, my great aunt Maddie, her husband left her, died, something. So she and a bunch of women whose husbands had left them or died, got together and created Phoenix City, which was this, they used to go in this cornfield and steal. And so they had this spirit to not only survive, but they like thrive. I mean, they were walking around Alabama in furs, you know? they were kicking it, right? But to call it Phoenix City and to be these women running like moonshiners in Alabama in like the 20s and 30s. You know what I'm saying? Like, to me, there are so many things in their lives, whether their husbands left, whether they died, you know, then they're like left alone in the world. You know, the expectation was for them to wear black all the time and to sort of shrivel into themselves. They're like, no, life is for living, and we're gonna live and make shine and have a good time. And you know, so to me, like the ways that we pivot just are such a testament to that spirit. And so for me, it's really hard for me to see Black people whose spirit is broken, but that's where I feel like that's what we have work to do. We have to hold one another up.
Yes, this is why we do this as a movie, because know people, allegedly people don't read books, even though we're still here, but, you know, and I don't want to take up all of your time, so I guess, other people can ask questions too. Does anyone have any questions for Jamila on Moonrise over New Jessup or on anything else?
Hi, good evening. My name is Calvin, and thank you very much. My question to you was, you used the term and the word, and I hear this word used a lot. What does it mean, justice, the word justice to you?
That's a great question, right? Because I think it depends on how you envision freedom. We had this sort of conversation earlier. I think if I ask people in this room how you define freedom for yourself, and I'm not saying like as a counter to somebody else, as a counter to some sort of opposition, but if all of the opposition in your world was gone, then what would freedom look like to you, smell like to you, taste like to you, sound like to you? And for me, I think that once we ask that of ourselves, we also have to interrogate whether that freedom relies on somebody else's subjugation. And when I get there, and I'm asking myself, does my version of freedom rely on somebody else to be under me, to be some sort of second-class citizen? Then that to me is the opposite of justice. So for me, I think justice really is the pursuit, if I had to define it on the fly, the pursuit of people being able to have the thing that is freedom for them. And that's not always going to match up. I think that we all have different ideas of what will make us happy. For me, it's Miss Catherine's garden. I would love having acres and acres of peach trees and stuff to take care of right now in Alabama, but that's not for everybody. But my dreams don't necessarily rely on somebody else's subjugation. When it comes to justice, I mean, I think justice and liberation are pretty close cousins, and I think liberation, for me, is the definition, is defined as the pursuit of freedom. And I think it's important for us to understand what our ideas of freedom are, so that when we're saying we're fighting for liberation, we're fighting for justice, we can know what that road looks like. We can know whether we're traveling on the right road, whether we're taking U-turns, detours, or whatever, or whether we're doing things that actively harm other people. You know, when I think about Charles Mills in Houston and his quote about being a social engineer, I think it is our responsibility to use whatever we learn to help other people find freedom. I really do. And so however you can do that in an impactful way, I feel like it's justice. I hope that answers your question.
I have one more. I want you to make me feel young. I mean, your book. I want to read your book and see what and I explained how you feel young again. I ordered a copy. I don't know how I get it before I leave. Your books are. Okay. I want to make sure I get mine. All right, thank you.
Excuse me. So what it really is, I think we, as young people, we are part of generations, right? So we're not born into the same generation as our grandparents. So when we're born, when we're little kids, we see our grandparents are elderly. And so the stories that they tell us are old-timey. My grandmama, my nanny, smells like peppermints. And she has this particular way about her, you know, that feels old-timey. Your slip is showing. You know what I'm saying? Like all the different things that when she was young, those were things that young people learned and said to one another, right? But what I think the difference is, you know, we can talk about the different fashion, we can talk, you know, this book really incorporates the fashion of the day, it incorporates the music of the day, it incorporates all the things that my elders and my ancestors would have lived in the same time frame as I would have been a young woman. So like in their 20s and 30s, right? And so when I'm listening to that, and I'm thinking about my parents, my grandparents swaying at some juke joint, right? And I'm writing that. And so then they pick it up and they say, okay, you got it, you were listening. And I think for them, it takes them back to a place, which to me is like the highest compliment to say that that words can take my family back to a place that they've been telling me about my entire life. For them to say you were listening and you got it right, that's like the highest compliment to me. So, I mean, I hope that my elders pick it up and say, I see my story. And I love when they say that, and then the young people are like, oh, you were young once. Like it's a surprise to them. Like these students, the young scholars are like, oh, my grandmama like really made mistakes and had crushes, and you weren't, granddaddy wasn't your only boyfriend. It's like, where does she?
Don't be talking to the younger generations. Don't be saying that. So
No,
when you look at them
but
like,
that's the thing. Like, how many times when you were coming up to hear, well, back in my day, and then that was like the key to like turn your attention off. But it's like they were actually saying something to you. So when my auntie was telling me, yeah, your uncle was not my first boyfriend, nor was he my only boyfriend at the time. I was like, okay. On the one hand, I hear you, but my uncle's been gone for like 20 years now. I mean, I don't want to hear all of it, but you know, it's like we have to recognize that they were young. Like we weren't the people, we didn't invent youth. Like it's cyclical. They've been through some things. So. Hi, my friend. How you doing?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for coming tonight.
Absolutely. So I haven't finished Moonrise over New Jessup, but I make photographs. And one of the things that I remember.
Beautiful photographs.
Thank you. I remember after reading this was, or parts of it, was how vivid it was, right? And to your point, I think just reading it, you start getting visuals of what life is like, right? And you know, I'm picking up on a theme listening to you here and kind of like our conversations where sometimes it can, I'm not American, I was born in another country, but coming here, you know, I automatically became black.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, I'm just black. It almost seems like, as I've looked at, you know, black history, or the way black history is presented to me, there's like this freeze, this like frozenness and struggle, where I think your book, for me, it really, because when I think of Alabama and the South, you know, I think about rednecks,
Right.
people, black people being like subjugated.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, this was important. Like, I want my girls to read this, because for me, it's like, it unfreezes the struggle a bit.
Yeah.
And like you said, it separates our existence into just our existence.
Right.
And all the different parts, right? The nuance of being a human being that's outside of like the great big American narrative of the black person in this land. So thank you.
Oh,
And
thank you.
and then the other thing is, have you considered like creating visuals for this story, or representing it in a different form, right? Because I think even in the storytelling that kind of permeates popular culture around blackness, it's very it's not nuanced.
You know, it's interesting. That's a great question. And I mean, I will put in a plug if y'all ever have the great opportunity to work with her. I was very blessed to have the opportunity. He's an incredible photographer. I would love to see this as a movie, as a television show. But when I was at Jackson State, so I was on my HBCU tour for, you know, I have one more stop to go, for the first 2 months, 3 months of this year. And I was at Jackson State, and they had 2 days of programming around the book. And some of the students and faculty members did exactly that. They had all these different, they like took different art forms. There were paintings, Some of them wrote letters between Alice and Rosie, their poetry. I mean, they did all of these different, they took the art and created more art in different ways. And it was such an honor to see how they interpreted, how they could take words, a story, and interpret it in all these different ways. And so I always, I have a very vivid idea of what New Jessup looks like. I can see it in my head, right? Because it's like the spaces that I came up seeing and knowing. And, the spaces that I even know now when I go back to Alabama. And so, but it's what I love is that people can experience that with me. That you say that it's vivid. And like, when we were, because we took our photos in the Arboretum, and we were going to direct you all over the Arboretum. And I was like, oh no, let's go to the Magnolias, because there's a section in the Magnolias that's very much like, it's almost like a little room at the top of the hill, remember?
Yeah.
And that to me is a very, like that space feels very intimate, very, very lush. And I think, even taking a photograph of that space without me in it, really is something that I would love to see somebody make something out of, is like, this is some representation of something that reminds them of New Jessup. So I would love to see all of
I have another question.
that.
And then it seems, just by listening, oral tradition was very important in helping to form this book. Are there any other pieces of literature that you read that inspired such rich storytelling? And, does your family have a family historian? Or is that kind of your thing now?
We have a couple of people in our family, a couple of them are now ancestors, but people who really did take the time. In Alabama, for instance, you can track your history in the state archives because Alabama was a slave state, and so archives have paper trails of property records. So you can sort of track your people back that way. But also, the Bureau of Land Management at Emancipation, was where the Freedmen's Bureau was housed. And so in order to get Freedmen's Bureau benefits, formerly enslaved people would give these narratives to these Freedmen's Bureau people. And on the one hand, a lot of the narratives were problematic because they were being written by white people, and they were being told by formerly enslaved people who were not literate. And so you don't get a full picture, but you get a bigger picture than what you find in some property record. So that was really, really helpful in sort of developing this whole scheme of the story, but also just visiting with folks. Again, it's not just my family. These stories in this book belong to all my elders, some who are now ancestors. And yes, there's a cadence and a rhythm to the way that we speak to each other. I remember Miss Hazel, who nobody can really say her exact age because she'll never give it, but she's close to 100. And it's just talking. She was out sweeping her walkway one day, and we were talking. But if you think about the rhythm, sweeping, and then she's talking according to that rhythm, sweeping, telling me a salacious story, but she's talking to the rhythm of sweeping. And so all of that, I think, I'm very fortunate. I mean, if there's one thing that I think, I'm partially good at, is having an ear for the cadence and the rhythm of our stories. And I wanted to catch that in the book.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Hey,
Hi, Dad.
so as a food person, I just gotta say how much I appreciate grits o'clock. That's my favorite. So I know exactly what time that is in my household. In South Carolina, we are grits eating people. It's a very serious thing. Every morning there will be grits. And so I really appreciated you writing it that way.
Yeah, because I mean, when we talk, listen, don't do something to a significant other, a friend, and everybody in that group hears about it. That's your nickname forever. You know what I'm saying? But the other thing is like, it's like you see a sister on the street. I'm like, okay, yo, what's up? It's like we have this way of speaking to each other that just captures the moment. And then that moment just passed. And so that's why Grits O'Clock felt like, you know, she's like, I'm not gonna say the hour, because it's Grits O'Clock. I mean, you know what time it is, time to be awake.
Did anyone else have a question before I ask my final question? I couldn't let y'all have the last word. So I had one more question. So right now, there's always a lot going on between Black men and women, right? In the public.
Yeah, we need to stop all that too. Can we
It's
stop having conversations in front of company?
I'm
I'm so serious.
truly.
I'm not saying not to have the conversation.
No, but we can deny it.
But we need to not have.
everybody.
Right.
So there's this issue of Jonathan Majors and Megan Good, and he called Megan Good his Coretta. And you know, obviously he is not the person who should be calling anybody Coretta. But it brought up the question. It brought up the topic of right. It brought up the question, the topic of our relationships, right? Yes. Between Black men and women.
Yes.
Yeah. Being colored by this colored by this narrative, right? That as soon as you're with how down are you in this relationship? Are you about to be my Malcolm? Are you about to be my Martin? Are you about to be my Coretta? Are you about to be my Betty? Why do we have to put this on us? And I feel like you push back against that in this book because Alice was like, I'm not here for this. I don't need to be a part of getting this municipality. I support you. I love you. I'm not about this life.
I ride for you.
I'll ride for you too.
I'll be in that corporate.
You know, I will keep our secrets. But listen, I ain't gonna be out there, and it's okay. It's okay. And I just want us to know that it's okay. And I feel like after every research,
sounds like a very deep reaction.
because it's true. I think that a lot of us, and it's not just necessarily in our male-female relationships, it's within our friendships too. How down are you? How are you about to fight for the movement? How Black are you? Are you gonna be out here resisting in this way? Like, Black people can just be Black and exist, and that's okay.
Okay, and so what I will say to that is we do one another this horrific disservice when we start talking about freedom fighters. Okay, and the reason I say that, I had a conversation where this sister said, she called Alice, she said, you know, my Instagram handle was Maya Sales. And she said, yeah, Alice was sort of a cowardly lion. And, you know, I said, she said because Alice was holding it down at home, but like you said, she wasn't out there pushing towards me. And I said, you know, I invite you to rethink that, because if I ask y'all like the stereotypical archetype for a freedom fighter in the 1960s Alabama, I can pretty much guarantee that we're probably all thinking about a handsome brother, 6'2", 6'3", close-cut hair, horn-rimmed glasses, sharp suit, nice shoes, and he's really about the movement, right? We have this archetype for this person, this man, probably a man. And then everybody else who doesn't fall in line with him in some way, that person is a coward. And so I said, what I invite you to do instead, and what I ask everybody in here to think about, is the fact that we are all freedom seekers. Every single one of us in this room is living our lives because we, in a way that we want and deserve to be free. And so when you think about Alice as a freedom seeker, you see Alice as a woman who can say, New Jessup may not be perfect, and our Black communities surely don't need to be perfect to be ours, But New Jessup may not be perfect, but it's ours. And so this is my version of freedom, is whatever you want to say about it. And then you see what she's willing to do for it. She's a freedom seeker. Dot's a freedom seeker. Raymond is a freedom seeker. And Raymond fits that quintessential archetype, right? But what we do is, when we have that archetype and we put those, probably a man, into that archetype, we rob them also of their own humanity. So then when Dr. King turns around and God forbid he's actually a man, we're like, oh my God, he can't be a spiritual leader. He can't be a leader of a community because he stepped out on Coretta. I'm like, that ain't my business. That is not the business that pays me. My business is the fact that Dr. King was a person who had a dream and actually believed in fellowship and spirituality and loving all people and led a poor people's campaign, right? But what we do is we rob him of his humanity because we have so lionized him that any misstep completely destroys the man's credibility, right? So we have lions and we have cowards. And we need to stop on that and recognize that we're all Black, we're all trying and seeking for freedom, and we're all doing it the best way we know how. And so for me, that's something you can tell I'm very passionate about. But I even think of Alice as a coward. I'm like, Alice was standing on business. At the end of that book, she was really legitimately standing on business.
She had a lot of growth, y'all.
But even when she moved to New Jessup,
exactly.
the thing is, Alice didn't change that much in New Jessup. She really didn't. She came into New Jessup saying, this place is mine, this is a place I'd fight for, this place is kind of dope. And at the end, she was saying, I don't want to leave. I never wanted to leave Alabama because this place is kind of dope. And that, to me, that is freedom-seeking mentality. And what's wrong with that? So, I feel like when we have these archetypes, these very narrow stereotypes that people are supposed to fit into, we rob them of all the nuance of being human, and we rob ourselves of the ability to get to know them as human. And we need to stop all that. Jonathan Majors, that's not my business. Like, they're grown and they can do whatever it is that they want to do. I love Black people. I love my people. We don't always do things I would want my people to do, but that's not going to keep me from saying, I want to seek freedom the best way I know how, and God bless them.
Y'all give Jamila a round of applause, too. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with us tonight. We had a lovely, amazing time. So, if you haven't gotten your book yet, please go grab it. And if you're online, you can grab it offline too. Good night,
Yes,
y'all.
thank you all for coming online too. Is it this red button?